morning. My name is Philipp Henger, and my artistic work lies in the field between design and art. Please allow me to introduce Gitanjali Dang. She's going to be our second speaker today. Dang is an independent writer and curator based in Mumbai. Her background is richly faceted. She has a BA in journalism, as well as a postgraduate diploma in Indian aesthetics and an MA in English literature. Her work reflects a particular interest in the public domain. Around this topic, she has developed a variety of projects in different public spaces, including the World Wide Web. Her articles have appeared in leading art papers such as Frieze and Art-Agenda. This summer, apexart published the catalogue Life Between the Borders, where she's featured as well. Following residencies from different institutions, Dang received a residency from Pro Helvetia this year. And without further ado, please welcome Gitanjali Dang.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Some of you have already heard this last week, so you'll have to bear with me a bit, but hopefully there are different images to entice you. So I started curating 5 years ago, maybe. But what I'm going to do just now is I'm going to look at work that has been done in this past year, work that I've been doing in this past year. Last year, in September last year, I started a sort of an itinerant arts lab. Sorry. Called Khanabadosh, which is a Persian word for those who carry their homes with them. I'd been wanting to start a sort of a not-for-profit kind of arts lab, an art space for a while, but coming from Bombay, where space is sort of a very beleaguered object, let's call it that. For a long time, I could not arrive at a decision as to how to go about this. But eventually, the idea came about that one doesn't really need a space to start projects. So I decided that I would start off this project and then get to travel across the city, and thereby also try to connect with different communities in doing so. And not just the city, but also basically the project travels with me wherever I go. So that's sort of like the preliminary premise. Aside from that, Khanabadosh also is interested in, has around it a bunch of ideas, and these ideas keep sort of developing over a period of time. So I'll just kind of maybe briefly touch on them and then take you through some of the projects that we've, and when I say we, it means the artist and you know, me as the curator, the collaborator on the project. Often people are like, okay, is it a collective? Or you keep saying we, but that isn't the case. Not right now, anyway. So one of the key ideas for Khanabadosh was the idea of the idea of the embodied aesthetic, as in an aesthetic which is I've been fascinated by the gap that appears in the visual arts and everywhere, in fact, wherein the gap between what is said and what is done, what is written, and what goes unwritten, what is between the lines. So this sort of gap, the idea was to kind of bridge this gap through various projects that we undertake, and hence the idea of the embodied aesthetic, where you carry your aesthetic on you. Let me just mention one of the key motifs with Khanabadosh is the motif of the turtle, and because turtles carry their homes with them. So that becomes a sort of central motif that one plays around with. And so when I say embodied aesthetic, in a sense that the artist, and I use the word artist sort of really broadly, carries their aesthetic with them all the time, and thereby there is no gap. Also, I must sort of mention that all of what I speak is might sound rather Platonic, but even if we're to sort of the idea is to sort of work towards that direction, if not necessarily constantly sort of arrive at a certain goal. So all the practitioners, all the artists that I've worked with in this past 1 year have necessarily they sort of necessarily carry the aesthetic on them, as it were. So there is no gap. They live this life. Their art. There's a blurring of boundaries between the two. One of the other key idea around Khanabadosh was to sort of work in an expanded curatorial field, which just means that constantly to look outside of perhaps the circuits that exist already in Bombay, in a city like Bombay as well. We have a sort of, a scene just as you have here. So to constantly look outside of it, to look where one can find interesting practices that might not necessarily fit a sort of an immediately broad definition of art, but these are practitioners who are doing interesting work and could in effect be sort of collaborate with Khanabadosh. One of the first people we worked with, one of the first projects we took on was actually a photojournalist and a writer. He works at several papers. He sort of freelances. His name is Javed Iqbal. So Javed sort of focuses on two subjects, and there is currently in India, in certain parts of the country, there's a sort of a state Maoist civil war, an ongoing state Maoist civil war, and this information doesn't necessarily percolate across the country. So what Javed does is he's actively involved in the field there, and photographing and writing about this civil war when he's not doing, and about the people who have sort of lost their homes in the process. So the exhibition was called Ghar, or Home, and so this was one aspect of it, and the other aspect of it was dealt with another sort of loss of home, and this was in the city of Bombay, where where in the slums of Bombay, people are constantly losing their homes because of certain redevelopment projects. So between these two sort of between these two ends, he's kind of explored the idea of home. The space here that you're seeing is called Studio X. It's a sort of a corollary of the it's actually a satellite set up by by Columbia University, and they have these across the world, and they look into sort of urban issues and issues of sustainability. And so we collaborated with them on this project, and let me just take you through some of the images. Sorry, I'm gonna, when I really move through the image fast, you should know that that is not the image I want to linger on. It's not kind of necessarily ordered. So that was the first project. The second project was so there isn't really a mandate of constantly sort of okay, we're going to work with a certain type of artist, and we're not going to work with a certain type of artist. We're going to work outside. One just takes it and moves along. The second artist we worked with was Valsan Kurma Koleri. He's actually a sort of very prominent Indian artist, and he lived in cities like Bombay and Delhi, from where he had a flourishing practice. But at some point of time, he decided to kind of move away from this and move back to his hometown, which is where he now is. And this is in Kerala, which is a state in the south of India. Now, apart from what Valsan shows in the galleries, which is sort of sculpture and installations which are made of stone, bronze, etc., he also has this practice that is kind of in between things, where he's constantly making things by sort of intervening into the processes of nature or working with found objects in nature. So, and this is a sort of practice that does not reach out. Is not something that is sort of present in the imagination of the viewer vis-a-vis Valsan's practice. So the idea was to kind of, instead of working with his practice vis-a-vis galleries, to kind of move out of the gallery and to work in a park in Bombay, This is the park. There was also another aspect to this project. In addition to drawing attention to Walsen's practice, the idea was also to kind of bring people to this park, which is a very sort of wonderful space in Bombay and a rare space. It's a sort of a green lung. But interestingly enough, most people don't know of its existence. So also the other aspect of the project was also to just simply bring people here to this space, which has thus far sort of remained, in a sense, hidden. So over a period of a couple of weeks, Walsen worked in the garden. He worked with the people, the caretakers of the garden, and people who were involved. People who worked in the garden were involved. The project kind of reached out to people otherwise in two ways. In that, of course, we sent out invites, etc., to everyone. But it was also just people who come to the park to kind of to take their daily walks would just encounter these works. This was one of the eye-catching works. He works with the palm fronds, and interestingly enough, a lot of people were curious, and some of them wanted to kind of know how to make these. So I think before he left, there were some people, like the kids of the gardener there, I think they picked up the way in which he makes these objects, which are sort of like weird, aquatic, alien kind of things. And the project was on, I think it was on for a couple of weeks, but it was again a function of when, for instance, when will these things sort of perish in a way, you know? In fact, I think we had to close down the project a couple of days before because things just sort of fell apart. So this is a sort of a winding down process. The third project we started was again was with Mona Gandhi. Now, Mona is not, is actually a writer, and she worked at a media house, and she gave up her profession. I think it was in Jan last year. Yeah, and she's always been interested in food, and but having left her job, she wanted to kind of focus it on more because she was interested in the politics and the economics of food. So this is really her life just now. I mean, even on a daily basis, Bombay also now has a flourishing sort of urban farming scene, and people are kind of involved in greening the city, as it were. So she does this every day. She's out farming in the city of Bombay every day. She's researching into food every day. And so this is a durational project. We do this over a year. Once a month, what we do is we have a meal. Again, we collaborate with different people. So the venue for this meal changes every month. So Bombay is a sort of a vertical city. And so we've had it like in South Bombay, which is where the art scene is. We've also had this like in the far suburbs. So at each venue, the people who come by are completely different. It's a complete, and also what's interesting is that we're also the sort of food then that is served there is also different. So I remember the second session we had was in a suburb of Bombay where certain sort of vegetables are not necessarily in circulation. So again, the idea was to kind of just pick up whatever is found in the locality so as to not exclude the people. Am I really, how much time do I have? I think I'm going really slow. No? It's okay? Okay. Sorry? 8 more minutes. Okay, so I should rush. So the idea is to sort of attract different communities around this project, and this was the last session we did. It was at a place called the Flyover Farm in Bombay. The food that we serve here is entirely unprocessed, so it's kind of steamed, raw, and whatever else, but it isn't processed. The idea is to step away from processed food, and through this project, there is also conversation around why. And with each session, this conversation involves, I mean, every time we send out the note as an email alert to people, we're constantly discussing, okay, how has this changed in the 1 month that we have not, that we've kind of had this period in the middle. So these are just some pictures from our last session. So again, now to quickly take you through some images of while I was here on so these are the 3 projects that I did before I came to Zurich on a residency in spring this year. I'm going to quickly take you through the images of that project. This is Jan. His last name is impossible, Kladeshvascha. But Jan is interested in cinema. I mean, it's amazing when I met him because this is his life. Sometimes, it's almost as though he's carrying it around with him. He's literally carrying. There was a time someone told me how they would find him walking around the roads with like carrying film reels. So it's in quite a literal sense, carrying his aesthetic. Jan was given 2 35mm projectors from the multiplex where he worked because they were disposing them because they were going digital. There are various layers to this project, but I'm just going to get to the fun part, which was that we took the 35mm projector from Kochstrasse to Rote Fabrik, where the exhibition was happening. We pulled it on this, and so it took us like around 4 hours to take it there, and 4 hours with like coffee, cigarette, conversation breaks. And it was an interesting experience because something like this in Bombay would have not really been eye-catching, but in a city like Zurich where everything is so streamlined, where everyone's kind of doing their thing without really moving out of out of the sort of their orbit, this caught a lot of attention. We had a lot of questions, people just generally being curious about what it was. And this is us finally managing to take it upstairs to Rote Fabrik, to the studio, where this exhibition was done. It was called Duende. Duende is a sort of Spanish language word. It's a sort of a sort of curious word. It has presence across a lot of, as an idea, it has a presence across a lot of cultures. But Duende is a sort of emotion that is evoked in you when you encounter a work of art, which is a really strong feeling, almost sometimes of either melancholy or horror, and you cannot necessarily identify why this work is immediately evoking that feeling in you. So this was the broad premise for the exhibition. The artists in this project were, some artists were from, there's our Zurich-based artists, like this work in front of you here is by Rafael Perret, and the video there in the distance is by Juan Carlos Alom, who this work and another work were given for the exhibition by the Daros Latin America Foundation, which is based out of Zurich. And there were also Indian artists. The work here, sorry, I keep pointing at the laptop screen. The work here is by an Indian artist, Shreyas Karle. Just quickly take you through some installation views. This is again by Navid Shop, who's a Zurich-based artist. Navid is interestingly has done also projects in India. That's Raphael. That in the distance there is Raphael Hefti, and the mirror again is by Samuel Porritt, also a Zurich-based artist. And following my return from the residency, I undertook a project with a person who goes by the name Campuswala. Now, Campuswala is actually is a historian of math and science. He was again in Bombay, but took a break from the city, went off to his hometown of Jaipur, where he started to research into the history of math and science, and this is what he's been doing for a period of 7 years. So through a conversation over a few months, we kind of developed a project. Let me see if I can say it without breaking. He sells seashells on the seashore. So it's a tongue twister in the English language. with this project, the idea was to kind of focus on the sort of connectedness of the deep sea and the deep space. That was one of the principal ideas behind this project. And for that, we worked with the motif. We worked with the motif of the mollusk or the seashell. Just to tell you briefly how the deep sea and the deep ocean were immediately connected through this project was that certain papers out there mentioned that so the mollusks can be one of the longest living creatures around. The longest living one of those is around, they live up to like 500 years. And so in this time, what happens is that the shells are affected by the tides, the water, the salinity, which is in turn affected by the tides and then the moon. So that was a sort of broad idea, and then we kind of worked with that to develop new connections within. This project happened at a space which is sort of very peculiar. It's a former recording studio, TV studio, and a friend runs the big space. It's a studio, it's huge, and fairly industrial. But so what he did was he allowed us the green room of that space. So what you're seeing here is a really small room. And it's a sort of incredibly provisional space. So what happens is that I was told already that there are gigs happening in the main studio, there are classes there, there are a lot of activities happening in the main studio. So when someone rents the main studio, in effect, they also have sort of this space. They take over this space as well. So if need be, I was told that we would have to uninstall and install the show each time someone wanted to use this space. Sort of once I was told that the site-specific installation, which you see up there, is sort of made from red thread, would have to be cut down, and so they cut it down, and then we had to install it again. But this is the space. What you're seeing are prints, drawings. That's my work desk. Let me just quickly give you a better sense of this by playing out a video for you, if I can find it. Sorry about the backing and forthing. I can't seem to find the videos though. I think this is it. Yeah. There was also a sound piece. It's called Songs for Mollusks. So it's found sounds. Some of them have been like, there are kind of open source sounds available online. The bad video work is mine. Do we have a couple of minutes? Shall I show? Okay, all right. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to build on that question that has been asked before about the link to our symposium topic. I mean, asking practitioners to talk about their specific work also means that we have to be flexible in our thinking and trying to see where the links are. What we've heard today and now with Gitanjali talking, she draws from the examples you've shown. I'm not talking about the curatorial practice, but already when looking at the specific work, we have a lot of examples that draw from different disciplinary traditions, mingle, overlay it with artistic strategies. There it's very interesting to ask what is really coming from where, material, technique, strategies, etc. So we're right into a very interesting discussion. So it's about seeing, perceiving, laying out these angles, and as Anahita and myself, we didn't want to discuss one specific concept and one specific understanding of vibration, but to give us a lot of different issues to talk about. That's why we addressed it that way. So I'm curious to hear questions from your side. Okay, so we've smooth, and then afterwards, Nana, please, Ian. We take both questions, and then we hand over to you again, to Gitanjali.
So I like the idea of collaboration, not in that sense of collective, but between the curator and the artist. So my question is, what amount of the collaboration is the curator, and what amount of the collaboration is the artist? What is the nature of the working relationship between you and the artist? I mean, I guess for curators, it's all different.
Mm-hmm. It varies.
I guess for curators, I mean, the ways in which they work with artists are different.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
We can take both questions.
It's kind of along the line, although I was hoping you'd answer first so I can actually formulate, because it's more. So I stumbled across it. You said that often you're taken, Khanabadosh is taken as a collective. I'm misunderstood as a collective or a group name, but it's
yeah,
you?
that's primarily because I keep going we.
Yeah, but I also saw that, for instance, you curated a program that showed yesterday? No, on
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
At here in Zurich, a film
ZHdK,
program. Yeah,
yes.
at ZHdK, not under your name. But
Yes,
under,
Khanabadosh.
yeah. And so there's two things. One is the curatorial. I mean, we all know in the 90s everybody wanted to be a DJ, and now since the 2000s it's like curating is the thing, and a lot of people start calling it no longer curating. For instance, the film, then they say, oh, we put the program together or something to work around it.
Sure.
But I do think it's, and there's been extensive writing about curators, the new artists, but I'm more curious about the social facilitating. It's clearly that, for instance, with the project with the food, it's also about community building, it's also about something that could have been called in different times not curating, but
Sure.
I don't know, facilitating, organizing, etc. So I was curious about, because you're clearly an interdisciplinary person, what for you fills that word? And the other thing is like the curating. So as opposed to using that instead of some other word. And then the other is, what intrigues you in using the name, not your name, also when you create something? What is the intriguing part of appearing, even as someone, or like being taken for a group or a project that isn't your identity, that comes with a name? Do you know what I mean? Like when you put together the film program, not under your given name, but as Khanabadosh.
So we've got three questions now. The one, and they're all going towards the same direction. So the link between you as a curator, the artist, your maybe also role as an artist, the social facilitating, Khanabadosh, an independent venture. Is it group or not? So address these questions.
I forgot what yours was. Just quickly.
Well, the question is the amount of well, it's basically the same similar question.
It might be that when I go
yeah,
back,
it's about the same thing. But just to add, in addition to what I've asked before, I mean, you're familiar with the term relational aesthetics by Nicolas Bourriat, and in the what's it called, some of the last set of images with the food.
Yeah.
It sort of speaks to a certain work by I can't remember the name of the artist, Tran something.
I remember your question now.
Yeah, okay, I remember the question. Who sort of his work sort of kickstarted that mode of engagement, which Bourriat much later called relational aesthetics. So how is that different from, or how is it in connection to what your friend is doing with food? Because I'm also interested in food.
Right. That's a different question. You didn't ask that first. That's a different question. So that's 4 questions. But I remember your first one, so I'll start with that. So your first question about the kind of the period of collaboration, it varies. With Mona, actually, just because, again, your second question was also related to that. She, like I said, she was working in media, she was working with a paper, she was doing HR, she was doing other things. And when she started sort of gradually sort of focusing on food more and more, I found that interesting. I found that interesting also in relation to sort of the ideas that I was dealing with vis-a-vis Khanabadosh, one of the most important being that of the embodied aesthetic. And I realized that this is one person who is sort of, there is no kind of separation between, this is her life. And and I'm interested in the gap and sort of shrinking the gap. And if there is this person who's already doing it, and I'm also interested in working in the expanded field, then why not also start a project with someone who doesn't necessarily see it as an artistic project, and that becomes more interesting in itself. One is also aware of sort of the pitfalls of something like this, because by sort of introducing, by sort of now positioning it as an art project, consequently, there are possibilities in the future that there will be newer gaps, because now she'll be working within the visual arts circuits where she will have to kind of follow certain codes and certain conduct. Of course, that's a given, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So for now, it is, yeah. And this period of collaboration, I've known her for several years as a friend. And so it's just been an ongoing conversation, and it's also interesting because it's also inflected my life. It's also, I mean, I've always also been interested in food and kind of clearing out the rubbish from it. So it's almost as though it's also collaborative in that sense, that, you know, we're often talking about it, we're constantly talking about it, we're constantly seeing as sharing notes as to what we discovered. Just yesterday someone mentioned there is an interesting writer who's written about vegetarianism in Australia, so I quickly sent off the name to her. I say, okay, now we look into this when I come back, maybe we do something with that. So, so that, about the collaboration bit. And it varies each time. So again, with Campuswala, the last project, for instance, it's peculiar, but I first came across him like several years ago when I was in college, and I would read his columns, and I was interested in what he would write about. And somehow I found him on Twitter again, and that started a conversation. And we had several affinities, and then sort of, you know, from there on it moved on, yeah. So the period of collaboration sometimes is, you know, could be 10 years, and that's just the first time you came in contact with the person to now, where something has suddenly been actualized, and sometimes it's not as much, as is the case of the recent project, which was yesterday. At ZHdK, there were 3 Indian documentaries shown under the sort of broad heading of Kairos, which is, as you can see, I like words. Kairos being the Greek word for a sort of a critical moment where certain action, a moment which is ripe for action, for movement. And this was in relation to the sort of current political situation in India. We have our upcoming elections in May, and these are like the biggest elections for the country, because it is possible that a man who is clearly fascist might take over the power of the nation as a prime minister. So it was kind of looking at, through the 3 films, looking at what has brought the country to this moment. And a project like this was developed very quickly because the idea was there. And I have not necessarily collaborated with the documentary filmmakers over a period of time. These are things that they worked on their own. The earliest documentary being from 2004, the most recent being from 2012. Okay. Well, Khanabadosh, why Khanabadosh?
It's actually not sort of a formulated question. It was just because it is, if you work under a name that people take for, you know, the idea of a group name was never that there weren't individuals who functioned under them, but it offers, I think you basically answered it. I now get that it offers the sense of collaboration, even if it's not as concrete, because when you put together a film program, but it means you're in a, you define your relation to the film works of the filmmakers as a collaboration.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Also, I mean, just to add, so thus far it hasn't happened, but the idea is to kind of keep it really open. So in the future, if there were to be a sort of another curator with an interesting idea, the idea would be just to invite the curator to do the project under the sort of umbrella of Khanabadosh. So those possibilities exist as well. They have been explored thus far. So Khanabadosh then just becomes a sort of like a shell, with a conduit for various projects. Also, the word itself is really resonant. I mean, at the time of sort of when I was thinking of names for the project, I had a few options, and I'm really glad I went with this one as opposed to some of the other more sort of stranger options I had in mind, primarily because the project, the philosophy and everything that I've kind of spoken about thus far and that continues to build have really emerged out of the name. So, I mean, we all know that the act of merely naming something is really powerful, and just through experience, I now realize how important or how powerful it can be, because after having given the name, all the ideas have sort of followed from just the name. So in that sense, my name is not as interesting either. So Khanabadosh is a sort of a better option to go with. Yeah.
We take another round of questions. Basim, thank you.
I'm interested in your work with public spaces, and I just wanted to know why you choose to work with public spaces or in public spaces, and also because the two examples you showed were targeted at a kind of specific public, because one was in a park and one was, had to do with food. So obviously there were people, a specific group of people in the park. It's not, you have to go to the park. So do you choose what kind of public you want to work with, or it just happened that way? It kind of like things kind of developed in that direction when you were working on those two projects?
So thus far we haven't, the idea is that they're the only sort of public project is the one in the park, but there are plans for the future which are sort of interventions in the public space. In the case of this project, it was quite clear that the idea was to work with Walsan to kind of explore his practice, what he does outside of what he does in the galleries, and hence his practice kind of it was quite clear that it would have to be in a sort of a more a natural surroundings as opposed to wherever else in the city. So that dictated the space. There are different some sort of just to show a direction as to what else could happen within the public space is, for instance, when I go back, one of the projects we undertake would also be Bombay being as sort of as densely populated as it is. There is a dearth of public spaces, again, as fraught as any other space is. But however, having said that, there are some pockets which, like the park here, which are kind of unexplored for various reasons. So we have a sort of an amphitheater that is in the art district of the city, which literally opens onto the street. So, I mean, as a metaphor, it's extremely rich, where the amphitheater, the street is the performing arena for this amphitheater, which sort of lies completely unused throughout the year and is only galvanized at a certain point of the year when there is a local arts festival, because of certain sound regulations in the city. Now, the idea is to kind of revitalize this space by inviting, not, just inviting musicians, inviting, I don't know, a magician, inviting whoever to come and do something here every fortnight, and then to sort of grab the people in and around, and also send out invites so people were to also come, to just revitalize the space, and also to maybe work with the municipality to just install better lighting, because that's what's missing. It just looks like a dreary space because there's no lighting. If that were to be done in this, the space could become a vibrant hub for people to just be or hang. So different sort of public spaces, different projects in the public spaces. Yeah.
Is there a last question? Here, Anahita, please. This is our last question for this round.
I'm following up on Basim's question, I think, because you said also with these cooking events, you did go to different spaces in Mumbai, like different locations and different areas, like poorer areas as well. And I was wondering what people got invited, and how do you choose to invite people? Was the community involved somehow, like who was living there, or yeah?
Sure. So, I mean, none of them, I mean, if there were different areas, I don't know if one could call them poor or otherwise, but they were completely different areas. The first edition happened at a sort of an off space in a sort of very hip neighborhood in Bombay. The second one happened across town in the suburbs where, maybe I didn't mention this earlier, but it's important to mention a lot of these projects, the food project, and even the project with the historian of math and science, Campuswala, it's already evident to us from the people who visit that we're attracting a different kind of audience, because while we might not have people from the arts visiting, because people can just be lazy, these events are not held where the art scene is, so just like very few people turn up. But we attract people, people we just don't know, people who've read about it in the papers and who just come by. But also the collaborator at that given point of time, they have a network in that area. So for instance, the second edition of this project was held at an off space called Kona. It's a sort of an artist-run space in the suburb of Borivali in Bombay. And it was just middle-class sort of housewives from the neighborhood who were invited. And this is really not a part of their everyday, because in India, food is a sort of the idea of, I mean, although processed food, in the sense that you might understand it in Zurich, it does not exist as much in most households, but processed in the sense that it's just cooked till almost all nutritional value is dead. So the idea was just to also invite them to kind of explore a different sort of eating pattern. But this is not something we constantly kind of proselytize about, So what happens is that when people come in there might be someone who's interested, I don't know, in losing weight. So it's just people approach it from different thresholds, and whatever brings them there is fine. And it can start off a conversation, and that conversation can in turn lead to other things. So while we do have a core idea in the project, the people who come there might come there for different reasons. And the people we work with for that project, they also sort of are important in sort of attracting an audience for this one.
Thank you very much, Gitanjali Dang.
Thank you very much.